speaker, Johanna, are you ready? Yeah? Okay. Are you tech fan? Are you all ready? Okay. Our next speaker is our guest of honor this evening, all the way from Australia. She's a very passionate person.
Should I time that?
I don't think so.
Should we time her?
No.
Just just at the 30-minute mark, just show the red light. Just so you know we're over time.
I leave it on.
Again, she is a very passionate person who has studied her honors in anthropology from James Cook University, her MBA in international development, and is currently doing her PhD in anthropology. She has traveled all over the world, has seen firsthand the abuse women in our world face. Determined to make a change, she started a women's empowerment project called Project Monma. Yes. Here to deliver a seminar on women's empowerment, please put your hands together for Miss Johanna Higgs.
Well, thank you so very much for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. It's a great honor to be able to come from so far away and get the opportunity to speak to you. So thank you very much to the organizers of the Toastmasters Club. Thank you to Salman, who I know initiated all of this. So, yes, thank you. Okay, so as my introduction was said, my name is Johanna Higgs and I'm from Perth in Australia. And I started this charity called Project Monma, which is basically, it's a women's empowerment project, and it's based in Central Africa. So we're working with women's groups in Uganda and Congo, and basically our idea is economic empowerment. So what we started to do is we started buying paper beads from women, as you can see over here, and we're selling those beads for those women. So basically the idea is to give them a source of income, and then with the funds that we make from those beads, we are starting a girls' scholarship program, which will hopefully start in the next couple of months. So, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and what's brought me here to want to come and stand in front of you tonight to talk about women's empowerment. So, I first headed off into the great wide world when I was 19 years old. And this was a very interesting journey, and it was of course filled with ups and downs, but it was my first insight into the different kinds of cultures and the different people that exist in this world. So I spent 3.5 years traveling around the Middle East, mostly Europe actually, and parts of Asia. And I saw all sorts of kinds of people and learned about all these different types of cultures that exist in those parts of the world. But it's also a journey where I discovered what I wanted to do in my life. And this was founded through a visit to the Balkans. So the Balkans is the southern part of Eastern Europe. Now, I had never experienced war of any kind. So I was shocked when I went to the Balkans. I was shocked by the bullet holes that I saw in the walls. I was shocked by the buildings that I saw laying in shambles. And I was shocked by the stories that I heard. I had no idea about this type of violence or what could bring someone to want to blow up the home of another person. And it was one particular experience that really confounded my whole experience in this region, and that was a visit to Kosovo. And Kosovo is the little yellow country just in case you don't know. But I was in Kosovo, and that was 2005, and it was 6 years after the war. There were buildings completely blown to smithereens. There were UN soldiers from Pakistan, from Nigeria, from all around the world. There were K4 soldiers, which you can see down in the picture here. And they were a special task force that was designed to keep the peace between the Albanians and the Serbs. So, as I visited this small province of Kosovo, it was the province of Serbia at the time, there were tanks rolling down the streets, there were K4 soldiers standing between the churches and the mosques so that they wouldn't fight when they went to pray. And I was 22 years old, and I was alone, and I was completely overwhelmed by this experience. but it was the first of many that really began to shape my perception of this world that we're living in. And it was also one of my first experiences where I saw the cruelty that one human being could show to another. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why these things were happening. So I decided that I was going to go home and I was going to go to university and I was going to use whatever opportunities and privileges that I've had in my life to sort of hopefully work towards making this world a little bit of a better place. So since then, as mentioned, I went to university in Queensland in Australia and I studied anthropology and politics. I did my honours in anthropology. And one of the things that I remember in my time in Kosovo was, he sticks in my mind, and it was this little boy. And I went for a walk around the town, and there was this little boy sitting in this pile of rubble, and he was playing with a toy truck. And I was shocked. Why did a little child have to play with his toys in such conditions? And so with this in my mind, I decided that I wanted to work in child protection in war zones. So I decided to write my honours thesis on child soldiers of the Lord's Resistance Army in northern Uganda. Have you heard of them? I don't know, they were... No? Okay. Well, basically, there's this rebel group that originated from northern Uganda, has now moved into eastern Congo, and they kidnap children and force them to become soldiers. So I worked at a rehabilitation centre for former soldiers, and these are two of the boys that I worked with, and both of them were kidnapped from their homes when they were children and forced to become soldiers. So, my travels have also continued. And from Ethiopia in Africa to France in Europe and Venezuela in South America, I've explored the islands of the Pacific, roamed through the deserts of the Middle East, and found myself in and amongst the islands of the Caribbean. I have been from Bangladesh to China, Mexico to Chile, Poland to Bosnia, and Kazakhstan to Mongolia. I have attempted to cross the infamous Darien Gap, which is the jungle between Colombia and Panama. I have traversed the Yemenese desert under the guise of being a wife of an Omani man, and meditated for days on end with Burmese Buddhists. From riding a bicycle across Zimbabwe to spending months floating across the Brazilian Amazon, the incredible diversity in the cultures that I have seen around the world has been fascinating. The rich culinary delights, the array of colors that adorn the temples of worships, the diverse architectural designs, and the incredible variations in traditional dress and costume is incredible. From drinking kava with remote Jogba tribes in Vanuatu, to discussing politics with former Kashmiri militants, and tasting fermented horse's milk in a market in Kyrgyzstan, my travels have shown me that the world has an incredible amount of delight to offer. Now, throughout my travels, one theme that I've seen to be recurrent, wherever I've gone, be it in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Pacific, is a desire for freedom and dignity, in whatever cultural form that it is derived. We all seek to live our lives in a manner where our desire for these qualities can be fulfilled. When we want to punish or when we want to control others, we take away their freedom, we take away their dignity, we may throw them in jail, and we deny them the basic tenets of being human. And I really wanted to emphasize this point because as I have traveled around the world and seen these rights to dignity and respect and freedom being denied. And now there are many, many groups around the world that are being discriminated against or not given full access to their rights. But tonight I want to talk about one group that it doesn't matter where I go, they're not being given full access to their rights. And that's me. So I have made it my passion to talk with women wherever I go in this world, not only to learn about their experiences, but also the types of violences that they've been exposed to. And these are some of the women that I've met. In the top left-hand women, these corners, these are women are from Vanuatu. The ones in the other corner are from that market in Kyrgyzstan that I said I went to. Down here, these are Burmese Buddhists, women monks, basically. In the middle, that's at a friend's wedding in Denmark. And then the two women on the right are from Yemen. So I have spoken to women in all parts of the world about their experiences, and this includes Belarus, Latvia, India, Iran, South Africa, Norway, Zambia, Honduras, Nicaragua, England, the United States, and many other places, and their stories are always the same. They have the same problems, the same barriers in their lives, and everywhere that I go, women are continuously blamed for the violence that is perpetrated against them. However, their stories have shaped me, they've inspired me, and they've encouraged me to be a voice for women that feel that they are voiceless. And many women do feel that they are voiceless. They feel that they are without the right to speak their minds, that they are without the right to be treated with dignity, and they are without the right to make their own choices in life. In fact, it concerned me greatly when not so long ago a friend of mine in Australia said that she thought we were lucky to have to have the right to make choices. And I thought, what kind of world are we living in where as women we feel lucky to have rights? So gender-based violence and discrimination is a difficult subject. It's one that seems to make other people uncomfortable and unwilling to talk about, even angry. But it's precisely for that reason that I wanted to come here tonight to talk to you about it. It's really difficult for me to present the full scope or the enormity of this problem or how I've experienced it over the last, however many years. So I thought I would share with you some of the stories of some of the women that I have met and share with you their stories. So the first comes from the Amazon. Now, I had been waiting on the Brazilian Amazon border for about a week for a cargo boat that was to take me down the river to the next village on the Bolivian side. And that journey took a week. Now, when you travel on the boats in the Amazon, you get a hammock basically, and then you string it up at the back of the boat. You string it up at the back on the boat, and that's basically your home. So that's what I did on this boat. And I was at the back of the boat with this lovely Bolivian woman. And she was in her 70s. That's her on the right. Now, over that week, we talked about many things, including her life. And she had a very interesting life and also a very difficult one. She had 12 children, and the first 9 were to an abusive husband who was also a drunk. She told me that she did eventually leave him, which I really, really admire of a woman living in a society like she does, because this is a society that stigmatizes divorced women. It's also a society that doesn't provide protection to women affected by violence. And it's also a society that doesn't provide protection to women affected by sexual violence. Now, as I was told many times throughout my time in South America, my 15 months there, that if you are part of a poor family, they just don't give importance to these matters. And I remember the moment that this woman told me these very words, and she just sort of looked at the ground. Now, I don't doubt for a second that this woman was incredibly strong and incredibly capable, but she was oppressed. She was oppressed by her society. She did not have the right just to be safe. She did not have the right to be free from sexual violence, because what I seemed to notice throughout my time in Bolivia and the Amazon, that what matters in these societies is what men want. And if a man wants to abuse his wife, if a man wants to abuse his wife, or if he wants to rape a young woman that comes from a poor family, that is what he's going to do. Because what matters in regards to a woman's life is not relevant. So, my next story comes from Sri Lanka. Now, I had been there working, and once I finished, I decided that I was going to travel up the east coast of Sri Lanka. Now, this was not long after, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the insurgency that had been happening in Sri Lanka, but not long after the Tamil Tigers had relinquished their land to the government. So it was a bit of an uncertain time. I didn't experience any problems in particular, but it was definitely, like I said, it was definitely an uncertain time, and there was definitely a lot of poverty in this area. So I had traveled about halfway up the east coast, and I was stayed in the home of an elderly Tamil lady. And she was a lovely lady, and she had many stories about life during the war. And she also had a little granddaughter. And this little granddaughter was fascinated with me, and she would chat away to me in Tamil, and I would chat away to her in English, and we were great friends, even though we couldn't actually speak to each other. And she would accompany me on walks around the local village. And I remember that on one of these walks, was this government soldier. Now, by this point in my travels, I'd realized that it's best to try and stay away from law enforcement in general. So I tried to steer a path around him, but he followed, and he started to ask me some questions, and of course I couldn't understand him, so it was a bit of a fruitless exercise. But what I noticed throughout this whole experience was the look on the little girl's face, and she was terrified. Now, when I got back to the house later that day, I asked the Tamil lady why. Why was this little girl so afraid of what? And she just replied casually, oh, well, that's because the soldiers rape the little girls around here. And I remember that this was one of my first experiences of shock. Well, first of all, that a man of law would do such a thing. But secondly, at the casualness with which this lady had said this. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why the soldiers were doing this. I wanted to know why nobody stopped them. And what did this mean? Did this mean that young girls just didn't have the freedom to leave their homes because they might get raped? Did this just mean that the soldiers, these men, had no respect for young women and girls? I mean, what was going on here? My next story comes from the Philippines. And it was here that I was introduced into the dark world of the sex industry. And this was one of my first experiences where I really learned the true horror of how poverty can make one vulnerable to another. And I had been working for an NGO called Child Hope, and they asked me to prepare a report to find out why street children went to the street. And so I did, and I spent my days walking through the slums of Manila with these field workers and talking to girls. And I heard many stories throughout this time. There were a lot of girls telling me stories about sexual slavery. I remember one girl, she told me that she was sold by her aunt to go and work in a bar as a sex slave in Manila. And this wasn't an underground bar or anything like this. This wasn't like a dungeon. It wasn't secret. It was an open bar where anybody could walk into. And I couldn't understand how this could happen. It seemed to me that these stories were normal. And it seemed to me that nobody even questioned them. I didn't understand until I met another little girl. And this little girl's eyes were dead. She had been abused so many times, and her story was harrowing. Though it's a story that she told me about the police that really stuck with me. And she said she was about 9 or 10 years old, and she was on the streets, and the police came. And they picked her up, and they took her back to the police station. And she told me that they said they were going to gang rape her. And she said she begged them, please, anything but that. And so I don't know, maybe the police were feeling merciful on this day, and they agreed. And they beat her up, and then they put her back on the street. Now, I began to understand that when the very men that are there to protect are the ones that are perpetrating the violence, something was very, very wrong. But I also was understanding that this was very, very normal. In Southeast Asia alone, there is an estimated between 300,000 and 500,000 girls a year kidnapped for sexual slavery. The preferred age is between 12 and 15. And again, I was asking myself, why? I mean, this is worse, as I'm sure you can all imagine, as human beings, this is worse than any horror show that you can imagine. And as I was asking myself these questions and I was thinking this, why? My mind would fill with these images of these men that I had seen that had come to buy these girls. And these were men from Europe, the United States, Japan, the Middle East, and my own country. And I wanted to know, what were they thinking when they walked into a room with a 14-year-old girl who was there against her will? I remember reading an account of a young girl from Sierra Leone in Africa. And she was talking about her experiences of rape during the Civil War. And she said, they didn't even want to know that I was human. And after these endless stories that I have heard and experienced and read about sexual violence against women in this world, I'm starting to know that. There has not been a single country that I have been to where this problem doesn't exist. Class, gender, race, religion, it doesn't matter, it's everywhere. And if you can see on this map, this is a map of women's physical security. The darker the country, the more dangerous it is for women. The lighter the country, supposedly it's more, the safer it is for women. I remember not so long ago I was working in Mongolia, and we were all sitting down at lunch one day, and my boss, who was a very, very nice man, he very kindly informed me that traditionally in Mongolia, women have been considered less than men. After working in Mongolia, I went to do some work in China, and I remember that I went out just for dinner with the son of the guy that I was working with him and some of his friends. And he had asked me what I had studied, and I said, anthropology and politics. And he looked at me and he said, oh, politics, that must be hard for a girl. A friend of mine from India told me that in India, women are, quote, nothing. An Australian friend of mine told me that women don't make good leaders. In December last year, I went to the Solomon Islands in the Pacific, and I heard countless stories of violence against women, including one story where a woman was pinned to a wall by knives by her husband. Another story where a woman had hot water thrown over her face by her husband. And one of those men was the chief of police. I've just come from India. I went to Kashmir to visit some friends, and I heard endless stories of rape by the Indian soldiers that were out there, including one story where the soldiers invaded a wedding and raped the bride. I put up a second map it shows more or less the same countries of violence against women, where the biggest problems are in the world and where the least problems are. And then I have a map here as well. This is sexual violence against women in conflict. So you can see the parts of the world where the women during conflict experience the most amount of violence. I have heard stories in Morocco that according to the penal code, a rapist is allowed to marry his victim if she is a minor as a way of avoiding prosecution. In Afghanistan, half of all women that are in jail in charge of moral crimes, including half who have been in prison just for being raped. In Iran, a cleric declared that all women that behave promiscuously and wear revealing clothing are to blame for earthquakes. These kind of injustices and these kind of attitudes, they're not just everyday occurrences. These things are attitudes that are prevalent in every single country around the world. These are not problems or attitudes that just happen in those poor countries or those African countries. This is something that happens in every single country around the world. For example, in Ireland, a survey revealed that 41% of men believe that a woman is partially or totally responsible for being raped if she is drunk or takes illegal drugs. 37% believe she bears some responsibility if she flirts extensively with a man. 26% think she bears responsibility if she wears sexy or revealing clothing. In England, the proportion of rapes dismissed by the police as no crime varies between 2 and 30%. And in Australia, in 2009, in a survey on community attitudes of violence against women, 2/3 of men said they thought violence against women was a common problem. Now, in many countries around the world, the authorities fail to investigate cases properly, and this is a major part of the problem. And I think that this is partly because often the top officials are in agreement with the persecutors. They are also doing the same things. So, for example, I read a story in Turkey about a woman who was trying to report her abusive husband. She repeatedly went to the police for help, and every time they called her husband and sent her back. And she recalled that on one of these times, the policeman told her husband to next time break her legs so that she couldn't escape. In 2011, in Esfahan in Iran, 14 men allegedly raided a party. They locked all the men in one room and raped all the female guests. Now, instead of speaking out against this, the chief of police said, well, if the women had worn their hijabs properly, perhaps they would have been sexually assaulted. So, I went to Iran last year, and they have some very interesting laws against women. One of the laws that I learned that was perhaps I thought the most barbaric was the fact that a man has the right to kill his wife for infidelity, and he can do this by burying her up to her neck and throwing stones at her. Meanwhile, his own infidelity is not only ignored, but it's condoned. I'm assuming that most of you heard about the Delhi rape case. I know in other parts of the world that it got a lot of attention. And there were a number of responses to this because I think of all the international pressure. A number of responses from the police and from the Indian politicians. And they had a number of interesting things to say. I did note that none of them were to tell men just not to assault women, but they did give out some advice telling women to, for example, if you don't want to be sexually assaulted, don't wear trousers, don't use mobile phones, which are so big in India. These stories are not only common, they are normal. And it seems to me that as I have moved around the world, subjugation of women is never questioned. In fact, it's considered tradition, standard, culture. Often it is considered the woman's fault if she is assaulted, raped, or harassed. There are a million reasons that I've heard for this. Perhaps the most common one is the way that she is dressed. I myself, when I complained about sexual harassment when I've been traveling, have been told to get over it. I've been told what do I expect if I go to those countries. I have been told to have more patience with the boys, and I have been told that I'm racist. They have laughed when I've recounted stories of sexual assault or sexual harassment as if this is some kind of comical event as opposed to a violating one. Little importance is given to these issues in this world because this is simply what boys do. And I have continued to ask the question of why. Why can I not have the freedom to walk down the street in Nicaragua or Honduras or Uganda or wherever I am without the freedom of being without the threat of being assaulted, harassed, or raped? I have often wondered why these boys have so little respect for me and so little respect for the other women in their communities. Why don't they think that I have the same rights to respect and dignity and freedom as they think that boys do? I will never forget the time that I was in Honduras and I was in the jungle and I met this woman. And she was telling me about how afraid she was of all the boys. And I said, yes, me too, I'm very afraid. Honduras was particularly a harsh place for me to travel. And then she said to me, I'm really worried for my mother. And I was confused because we had just been to see her mother and she was almost 80 years old. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean they rape the old women around here? And I'll never forget. And her eyes went wide. And she said, oh yes, ma'am, they rape their own mothers. And what this really showed me is that sexual violence and sexual harassment is not about women. It's not about where women are or how many drinks they've had or how they've chosen to drape clothing around their body. It's about a deep desire for domination over others by men. And it's about a deep desire for domination, especially over women. So it is so deep sometimes that it would bring boys and men to rape their own mothers. So I wanted to come here today to really draw attention to this issue and to make this point that it is an issue, because I have heard so many people deny that this problem even exists. However, it is really important to me that I don't just present women as victims, because whilst I have met many women that have been victimized by their societies, I have had the privilege to know many, many strong, very capable, wonderful women, and I would like to tell you about some of them as well. So the first woman I would like to tell you about is Tosha, and she's the one in the purple and white striped dress. So Tosha is, I met her in Uganda, and she's originally from Burundi in Africa. When she was 7 years old, she went to her first day of school, and when she came back, she found her whole family had been killed in the ethnic violence there. So she told me that she went to go and live with another family, and then they too were killed. So then she said that she went to the jungle, and she made the trees into her family and friends. And I don't know how, but somehow she survived, and she moved around refugee camps in Kenya and Tanzania until she got to Uganda. And she found a job, and she managed to make money to survive. And then one day, she was on the streets, and she saw this little boy, and she decided that she wanted to help him. So she ended up taking him into her home, and she made this boy her son. And then she did this for 3 other children. And she told me that she had to take on a second job just so that she could have enough money to feed them. Tosha is the most incredible woman that I have ever met. And today, reminding that she's had 1 day of school in her entire life, she's managed to get a job to be the second director of a Japanese NGO in Uganda. And she now regularly goes and gives inspirational speeches in Japan about her life. She's amazing. And at the same time that I met Tosha, I met Lily. And I mentioned earlier that I've been working in a rehabilitation center for child soldiers in Uganda. Now, Lily was abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army to become a wife of Joseph Kony, the leader of the LRA. So this would have meant that she was raped probably every single day. Now, Lily managed to escape. But then there was a peace negotiation between the government and between the LRA, and Joseph Kony said, I want Lily back. So she was given back as a token of goodwill by the Ugandan government. Of course, no peace agreement was reached. And when I met Lily, she had escaped for the second time with another wife. Now, there was not a single day that I did not see that woman smiling. And I don't know how, after everything that she'd been through, but she had a smile on her face every single day. There are no shortage of powerful, wonderful, strong women, and change is happening. And there are other women that have inspired me at an international level as well. There's Aung San Suu Kyi, which is the Burmese pro-democracy leader, who has inspired the world with her revolution against the dictatorship in Burma. There's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who's the current president of Liberia, and she's the first in Africa. She's done significant work in terms of development of the country, but she's also started a national campaign to stop violence against women in Liberia. And then there's my favorite, Malala. I'm sure you've heard of her. She's a 16-year-old girl that was shot by the Taliban in the head just because she wanted to go to school. And not only has she survived, but she stood up strong to become a global ambassador for girls' education. And she now gives speeches at the United Nations. I mean, she's an inspiration. So women are strong, women are able, women are capable, and women can participate in all aspects of human society. Yet for some reason, walls are continuously built up in front of them. In some parts of the world, girls are denied an education just because they're a girl. In some parts of the world, women are denied equal pay to men, and they're denied certain access to certain jobs just because they're women. And when so not all women are as strong as the woman that I met in Bolivia, and a lot of women don't have the choice to be able to leave abusive relationships when they find themselves stuck in them. And why is this? Because so often, as I mentioned, communities discriminate against women. She has no option to leave if she would like to. Do I need to finish that? All right. So again, I'm continuing to ask the questions of why. Why is society structured in such a way that they discriminate so strongly against women to keep them from, first of all, participating in all aspects of society, and so that women must continually face discrimination and violence on a daily basis? Why must a young girl in Pakistan have to choose between being abused by her husband in the home or being abused by society because she has chosen to leave? Why must a young Kashmiri girl have to stay silent about the fact that she was raped because she knows that it's her that's going to be stigmatized as opposed to the rapist? Why must a little girl in Western China feel that she has to stay quiet in class because she's been taught that good girls don't speak? Why must a small girl or a young woman in India feel that she can't have a boyfriend because she knows that the threat is going to be gang rape or death if she chooses to do so? Why do I read statistics like 80% of women in Ethiopia think that they deserve to be beaten by their husbands? At the very beginning of my travels, when I was barely 20 years old, I was in Iceland. And an Argentinian man said to me that he thought I was in the top 5% of lucky people in the world. And at that time, I had no idea what he was talking about. My life was just normal. But now I know what he means. I have food, I have shelter, I have an education, I've had a peaceful country to live in, and as a woman, I've had the right to have a voice. I've had the right to make choices about my life, and I have grown up in a country where if a man rapes a woman, it is him that is the monster, not the woman. I have had a right to something that these women I've spoken about in Sri Lanka or Bolivia or the Philippines have not had, and that is a right to safety. And everybody has the right to safety. Everybody has the right to live their life in a way where they have access to freedom, dignity, and respect in whatever way is culturally meaningful to them. Now, change is absolutely possible, and I really believe that this lies in people's attitudes. Don't underestimate how powerful you are with your attitudes. When I compare the differences of countries that I've been to where it's very safe for women, like Denmark, and countries that are less safe for women, like perhaps like India, the differences in people's attitudes. You cannot go into a bar or into a social setting in Denmark and say, I beat my wife, and feel proud of that. You'll be socially shunned. But from what I've experienced in India, it seems that this is just something that's quite normal. So I have come here today to really to bring attention to this issue of violence against women, and to really encourage you to all talk about it so that it doesn't get lost in these layers of silence and acceptance that is the way that it is at the moment. So I've asked a lot of whys tonight, so now I would really like to open the floor up to you and ask you why you think that violence against women exists, what are the roots of it, what are its causes, but most importantly, what can we do to prevent it from happening?
Okay, got added a few to what Johanna said, or answering your questions. I believe some of the reasons why, to begin with, women do experience violence, and whether it was sexual or not, is the feeling of the society surrounding them that they are less, that they are not as equal as men having a condescending view or opinion of women. It could be as well as you mentioned, that in some societies they are brought up, women themselves are brought up to be convinced that they are indeed themselves less than men, and they should be obedient to men, and they are basically born to serve men. Just some of the reasons that might lead to these violences against them. I think another major reason is lack of proper education and awareness amongst both women and men, whether it was in the upbringing of their parents or in schools. How we can probably prevent them is also, like I mentioned, going through the roots of the problem, is to build or start having a proper education and awareness, to raise awareness, and like you mentioned, to change the attitudes in which men and women present themselves. Whether it was a woman not accepting a man's violence or abuse and to state it without any shame or fear, or whether the man himself would always think twice about doing anything harmful towards a woman, because in the beginning he himself should believe that it is wrong and must not even think about doing it. That's all I have to say.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I come from India, and what I believe is that violence against women is mostly due to women themselves. If women today stand up against violence, suppose if like in the Indian community, the women, the daughter-in-laws face violence against their mother-in-laws. So they come under a violence with the consent of their mother-in-laws. So if the women, the older women, stand against the violence and stand up for the women and fight against the violence, I think it should solve a major problem, major issue, especially in the educated society. So this problem is not there only in the uneducated society. This problem of violence against women is more into an educated society than into an uneducated society. So what we actually need is need to do is to educate women and make them realize that you are a woman. You have to support the other girl in your family, your daughter-in-law, any women in the family. And if you support her, if you be part of her, if you stand beside her, I don't think any man would have the guts to abuse another woman in front of a woman who's standing.
My name is Hadid and I come from Saudi Arabia. We don't have often rape problems, but what I believe in my community, women are seen as an object, as a fruit, or that it has to be overprotected because there are some predators who might attack, Because we're responsible, it's as if we're surrounded by animals, so we're treated as if we're food. That's how it is. We're treated like an object. That's how it comes up. So it's the mentality of men that has to be changed, that they think, the way they look at women as fruit, And we're allowed to have more marriage. Yeah, that's what I believe. They think that women are just fruits, and that you're allowed to marry multiple fruits, different flavors. And it's by force, actually. Because a woman shouldn't. It's a different case, but it's still against women's right. It might be a bit religious, but women are seen as objects. That's how I say it.
I think that's a global problem, and I went to Zimbabwe last year. I said I rode a bicycle across, and I remember this woman we met, and she likened herself to a donkey. That her only purpose is there to work for a man, and she has no value like a donkey. So, in protest to that, me and my two friends are going to walk a donkey across Angola later this year. That's our plan. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, my opinion about this violation all over the world is that there is lack of education not only in the women. Lack of education is also there in the men also. If the men are educated, they will never do such type of violence. So my question is now to you is that, have you got any plan how you will stop this violence all over the world?
Do I have any idea about how?
Yeah, how you are going to stop this violence all over the world? Have you got any plan?
I'd like to hear from the ladies. So, yeah. How about we go one and then I can get this.
I don't think it's a one-person job to stop violence. So, directing the question to her is not going to solve the answer, but it is within yourself, after you've been educated, to put forward practices that may help. But what I wanted to share was, actually my father recognized this problem from a young age. He taught me and my sister basically to live as if there will be no single man in the world. So we learned to change tires, fix tiles, build stuff, everything that a guy would normally do in Bahrain society. He drilled it into us to make sure that we were just strong and independent women. The other thing that he always taught me was, if a guy hits you, you hit him twice or you hit him with something harder. You do not sit down, you do not be quiet. If somebody has taken something from you and hurt you, do not take it from them. And it's examples like this that you can pass on to people, your children, that would help it.
Good man.
One solution to this problem is mothers should teach their boys from very young age to respect women, to respect sister, to respect any other girl. It has to start from the very young age. This sex discrimination, the difference between boy and the girl, that attitude, it begins from childhood. So it is basic responsibility of any mother. Basically, it's a responsibility of any mother to teach her child, to teach her son to respect the opposite sex from the childhood. Because in many families, boy child has given the superiority, that you are a boy, you are superior, So that attitude begins from the childhood. So it's, in my opinion, it's a responsibility of mother to teach her child to respect.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people make a similar comment that it has to do with the parents and it has to start at a very young age, absolutely. So again, that's where all of you are extremely powerful because you're all likely to have children and you all have that power to teach your children, about equality. So I think was there another one?
Yeah.
And then again? Yeah? Oh, what?
What I wanted to point out is that the reason that there's violence against women, it's not because of education or anything, it's because the people who are doing it, they know that they can't get away with it. And this is why you see that in all these societies, because there is no sanctions, there is no punishment, they can get away with it. And sometimes the things that they would do, they would go to the greatest extent possible, because who's going to stop them? So probably in these countries, it's not going to be from one person or one family. It has to come from the higher level. And if the governments are not going to support this, then it is a bit difficult for them. So it has to start at the top. Maybe one person at the top, you can change everything. But the only reason that this happens is because there's no one to actually stop them from doing this in the first place. And I think this is why they see an opportunity, they abuse this opportunity, and the women have to take the hit for it, actually.
I agree. And that's when I was talking about the problem being with the police.
The police,
not enforcing
exactly.
laws. Last year I mentioned I went to Iran and I was talking to an Iranian man about this topic. And I asked him what percentage he thought of men would rape a woman would rape a woman. And he thought about it for a second. He said if there was no consequence, 90%. And then an Indian friend of mine, she told me the same number. And I've heard the same number in different places. So, yes, there has to be consequence for action. Otherwise, I agree with you. Absolutely.
First of all, I really enjoyed for your speech, but I have an idea. Behind each successful man, there is woman. Because you know why? This one, we are here from we was young, child, because my dad was saying, if there is bad woman, not successful men, there is bad women. I didn't hear we don't have here in Bahrain a lot of weddings, that type of problems, I think. In our family we don't have, because we believe that the successful men, behind of them is successful women. And we educate ourselves. If there is no powerful woman at home, the home will be collapsed and everything will be collapsed. For example, if my mom, she is tired or she is sick, everything at home will be damaged and everything will be. It's like a system in our world. If the women, they are not strong, the men never ever become good men. It's like, we are leaders of the men. I'm sorry, but we are leaders of the men. And if we believe these things, believe these systems, we never ever have this problem. Thank you.
Hello everybody. I've heard everybody's comments and they said many things. Most importantly is education. But it makes no difference to an educated man and a non-educated man to slap another woman. Because it's not education that will change anything. It'll probably just teach you how to slap better. But in the case, education is never always the solution. Because if you would raise a child, maybe a boy or a girl, and you would not speak anything about, if you would not differentiate anything about sex, they would learn and live to treat the other person with the utmost respect. Education is never, in this part, it is a factor, But the most important thing here is action and punishment. Because I've been here in this country and I've seen, in the newspapers we will have huge articles that says animal cruelty, where a man will abuse a dog, people will send in letters, they will say, protect these dogs, give a committee. But if there will be a plain uncle from one family who touches his little niece, they would arrest him, they would put him to court, and then they would say, this man just has a disease, let him go. Put him in jail for 1 year. So we give importance to people who injure a dog. Not that against animals, of course, but the preference is because we choose not to action on these things because we think it's taboo or it's too big of us. Here we have Johanna who's going to be speaking, telling us, why does she tell us all of these stories? Okay, we can stand here and we can say, yes, it's all because of education, yes, because we have to do this, or we have to teach our children, but that is always the future aspect of it. That yes, when I have my kids, I'll teach my son not to hit another girl. But that's not going to solve anything. The change that will happen has to come from us. If you see someone, even your own friend, or even if your own brother, if you know he's doing something that is not right, you have to act on it. You have to call on it. Because it doesn't need education. No one needs to tell you that hitting another person is wrong. Because you know downright, even from God's written word, that it's wrong. So if you have the right, you have the power, do it. So next time you see something, act on it. This is why we're here today, because we wanted to show that we should do something, not because we should think about something what we can do, but we should act as it is tonight, we should do it tomorrow, and keep at it. Because if it goes on, if I am like this, then my son will be, and his son will be after that. And hopefully within 30 years, maybe, God willing, this would be a thing of the past.
I couldn't agree more, absolutely. And I think that that is part of that is courage. Like maybe you're going to be afraid that if you see a guy hitting his girlfriend or his wife, you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't say something because then they're going to get angry at me. And that's one of the most common reasons I've heard from people about why they don't do anything. But perhaps a good question to ask yourself is, what if it was happening to me? What would I want someone else to do for me? And to remember that as soon as you condone it to happen to someone else, you're saying it's okay. And it means it's okay to happen to you. It's okay to happen to your mother, to your sister, to your brother. So yeah, I absolutely agree, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for a very wonderful insight over this violence against the women. I just want to ask you a question. You told us that the youngsters have the right to protect this violence against the women or whatever. The reason it could be, it may be the traditions, they were brought up according to hadith, they are looked at like the fruits and just an object. And here an opposite opinion was given by Ruqayya, saying that it is there are powerful women behind the men who are very powerful. Do you think that this violence against women is created by men only, or is there a reason that could be a reason for women as well?
Do you mean, do I think that women play a part in their own violence? The violence perpetrated against them?
Yes, my question.
Absolutely not. No, never. Nobody ever deserves to be beaten, to be raped, to be attacked. Never. So no, I
agree with that. But considering the points they were making here, one nation, they say they are looked at like an objects, and here she was telling that women should take the right stand and teach the children. But what do you think, in your opinion? I mean, you have visited so many countries and so many knowledge you have got into your mind about this situation. What was the root cause this?
I think that the ladies and the men here have addressed some of those points already tonight. And And I think the fact that there's no punishment for it is absolutely a key reason for it. I think that there's something about power over others, and this is not just about male power over females. It's quite common, you see it around the world. Certain groups want to dominate other groups. Why they want to do that, I think it gives them a sense of security, a sense of safety over, something that they want. I think that there is a deep desire please correct me if I'm wrong, men, but there's a deep desire to control women in many parts of the world, especially their sexuality. And it doesn't matter where you go. In my country, in any country, women's sexuality is controlled. Don't wear that because then you might attract a man, or you shouldn't be doing that because then you might attract a man. So there's something about that as well. Lack of laws, lack of implication, bad attitudes. That I think also what you said here about the fact that women also perpetrate it as well, which is bizarre. And I've heard women blame women for the violence conducted against them. And I spoke to a Turkish woman about that and why she thinks that women do that and why women blame other women. And she said that she thinks that it's because if you just make it that one woman that was bad and that's why she was assaulted or that's why she was attacked, that means it's just that woman. It's not a problem that could affect any woman. So because she's scared and because it's too painful to admit that there is a serious problem of discrimination against violence against women in this world, she just blames that woman, which of course adds to the cycle of violence. But I also think lack of education. One time I was in Nicaragua and I was fed up of all the harassment. I was on the street and this boy said something to me and I just shouted at him, so tired of it. And I turned around to this street vendor and I said, "Why is he doing that?" And he just said, "He's not educated." And up until that point, I didn't understand, what if he doesn't know what 1 + 1 is, what's that got to do with him harassing me? And then I asked my Spanish teacher later, and she said, "Well, Johanna, it's not about knowing what 1 + 1 is. It's because when you go to school, that's where you learn to behave with others." And I realized that she's right. So absolutely, while you have to go beyond education to speaking out, I think that it's almost like we need to be taught to be nice. We need to be taught how to get along with others. So I think that it's a multitude of reasons that you've already addressed.
In my personal opinion, I would say it is so many reasons here. Women are considered to be less than men and they can overpower the women in every aspect, not only in sexually but in otherwise. Religion is one reason. Some of the religions, they definitely say that women cannot go beyond the limit of this, even in wearing a dress or even in moving with men or just going about in their own freedom is completely restricted through religion in one part of the world or in one part of the society. For instance, in Afghanistan, when you take Malalas in Pakistan, the women are considered not to do anything beyond men. Is that right? Even the education is completely taboo for women. So this is the root cause. I mean, it has been coming from the tradition to tradition from the very, very old age. And do you think it will be very easy to tackle the situation? Because I would say, now here in Bahrain there are so many news may not be heard by us, but I read in today's GDN, in last November 2013, there had been 4 women had been just taken away while they were walking from the road and they were completely raped and made them forcibly made naked, photographs were taken and they were done whatever the possible sexually and violently what they could do for the world, 4 women were done. Still it persists, and according to your stories, most of the damages were caused by the people who are supposed to protect, the policemen and the law enforcement people, etc. So, is it easy to tackle the way it is supposed to be tackled, what we are expecting? That's my question. I mean, I know that this is the way you are trying to educate the society, but is it easy with these religious restrictions, society imposement, and all other aspects, the law enforcement? etc., which is not taken seriously. So how do you think we can tackle this?
Okay. So first of all, no, it's not easy. It's extremely
Excuse me,
difficult.
Johanna, sorry to interrupt you. I'm extremely sorry I have to interrupt the discussion in between, but I have to leave. Can I? Can I?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank you so
your
much.
Thank you so much. When I've spoken to women and men around the world, they just say one word, and I'm supposed to shut up, and that's culture. And it's just, this is the way we do it, so you can't say anything about it. Violence is never culture. And this is something, like I said, that exists in every country around the world, so it can't be culture because it's everybody's culture then. So no, it's not easy to change at all when you have that kind of mentality, and people feel stuck. When they think it's their culture, they think they can't change it, they think they have to accept it. But my family is originally from the UK, and I know that, violence and discrimination against women was entrenched a couple of hundred years ago. And I know that women didn't have the vote at one point, and women were considered less than men. I think there was something like, for every one man in court, there had to be 6 women, or something silly like this. But today, it's very, very, very different. The situation, like I've said, I've never for one second growing up did I feel I was any different from boys. Nobody ever told me that. I was given equal opportunity to my brother and all the other boys. So from that, I know things can change, but I think things only change when people demand it to change. So individuals underestimate how powerful, like I've said, how powerful they are. So I think that maybe not as an individual, but as a group, you could work together to change things, as long as you have the courage to speak out and to, as she was saying, to support other women, in the change program. And especially with men, it's very important that the good men speak out. Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk, Johanna. I just wanted to point out something.
Yep.
I am a Bahraini, and I do live alone, and from what I've noticed within my last 26 years in Bahrain, Ruqayya and Hadil say that there is no rape within our society, which is completely untrue. There is no rape in front of, for Bahrainis, yes. For Saudis, yes. But all other female foreigners in the country who are harassed, are being abused, any form, if they are caught alone late at night, and there's a group of people that could be taken advantage of. I don't dress as a normal Bahraini person. I'm very open-minded, so I feel very liberal with the way I think and the way I speak to people and everything, and that is a very negative factor for me. Coming home, for example, with my neighborhood, with, hypothetically speaking, 5 boys in front of my doorstep, and I wouldn't be able to go home because they're blocking my door and they look aggressive. And it's happened before. I'm not saying this is completely hypothetical. It has happened before. I would have to drive around a few times, a little bit scared because I came home too late, just because I don't look like a normal Bahraini person, a normal Bahraini woman. Unfortunately, within this region, if you are covered, if you're an Arabic speaker, you're covered, automatically you have a force field around you. If you are not, you're an easier target, especially if you're alone. Especially, they would say, oh, nothing happened, everything, there's a sugarcoating to how everyone talks in the society, but at the end of the day, this is what happens, and only small headlines in the paper would state, oh, we found this body here. No idea who it is, just letting everybody know. That's it. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I know that women from Nepal have been under 30 have been banned from coming to this part of the world because too many of them were getting raped. So yeah, absolutely, and I know definitely amongst the migrant population, sexual assault and abuse is rampant. So yeah, very good point. And I've certainly, not here in Bahrain, but I've been harassed in other parts of Middle East.
Madam, with your experience around the world, what does it help the poverty with the compared with most attacks and the slavery?
I mean, what effect does poverty have on violence?
No, his question is whether this poverty has something to do with these attacks, the violence against
Most of the groups cases.
Definitely, because when you can afford to build a wall around you, it's less likely that it's going to happen to you, of course. Like this little girl in the Philippines I told you about. She had nobody to protect her, she had no house to live in, so she was extremely vulnerable, and that was because she was poor. So absolutely. I don't think it's limited to poverty. You know, poor girls and poor women, though they're certainly more vulnerable to it. And I know I went to Haiti a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but a few years back there was a massive earthquake. And I don't want to repeat the stories that I read about what's happening to girls and women over there, because they're living in tents, they're living in camps, and the sexual violence is out of control. And I think that if there was more security, yes, there would be less of that, but because they're poor, because they have no money, they're left in the open and they're left vulnerable. So yes, I think that plays a part, but it's certainly not limited.
With your experience around the world, what is the message for Bahrain?
What is the message for Bahrain?
Yeah.
From me?
Yeah.
Be courageous. Don't be afraid. Stand up. If you want to be a chemical engineer, don't let anybody stop you. If you want to live alone, go live alone and don't let anyone tell you that it's not okay. Whatever you want to do, fight for it because it's your rights. You're a human being, you have a voice because you were supposed to use it. So I would encourage you to really support each other and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it, because I know that you can.
What about agree at a certain point, but what about the culture in the country? So that you said fight it.
I don't feel that it's my place to comment on Bahraini culture, and I'm not familiar enough with it to do so. But I certainly can say that in other parts of the world, the culture is a problem that gets in the way, and as religion, as you commented. But I think, again, I don't want to comment on that, but I think it's up to you guys to decide. Because when I say everyone has the right to freedom, dignity, and respect, in whatever way is culturally meaningful to them. So in whatever way that you feel that, you know, you get respect and dignity, you should fight for that in whatever means that is meaningful to you. So I don't want to tell you how to do it, that's up to you.
Okay, Johanna, I think the time is up. We have given more than time. Let's wind it up.
Round of applause, please.